There are nights that change a woman's life forever, and then there are nights that divide her life into two parts, the part where she was still trying to survive, and the part where she finally realized survival was no longer enough. On a cold, rain-soaked street just after midnight, a young single mother named Elena Carter ran barefoot through the dark with her 5-year-old daughter pressed tightly against her chest, her breath broken, her body shaking, her face streaked with rain and tears and the faint marks of the man who had sworn to love her until death. Behind her, headlights cut through the storm like a predator closing in. Her ex-husband, Victor Hayes, had found her again. And if you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll hear how the most feared man in that city stepped out of the shadows, saved her from the man who nearly destroyed her and changed her life in ways no one could have imagined. Because the first time the Mafia boss saved her, she thought he was a monster. The second time, she realized he was the only man standing between her and death. But when he asked her to move into his house, she had no idea she was stepping into a world where safety, desire, and danger would become impossible to separate. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're in Georgia, Moscow, Ohio, California, New York, Mexico City, Tokyo, drop your location below. And if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What you are about to hear is told in the style of a true documentary story, inspired by the brutal reality of domestic abuse cases that happen every day in America, where women often leave not once, but many times before they are truly free, and where the most dangerous moment is often not during the relationship, but after they try to escape. In real life, experts who work with abuse survivors have warned again and again that leaving can be the moment violence escalates, not ends. And that is exactly where Elena's story begins. She had already done the impossible. She had packed a small bag, taken her daughter, and walked away from a marriage built on apologies, fear, broken promises, bruises hidden under long sleeves, and nights spent pretending everything was fine for the sake of a child too young to understand why Mommy flinched every time a door slammed. By the time Victor found her that night, Elena had been gone for nearly 4 months. 4 months of cheap motel rooms, borrowed couches, cash tips hidden inside coffee cans, panic every time an unfamiliar car slowed outside her apartment building, and the constant lie she told her daughter every morning. "We're okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay now." But nothing was okay. Victor had been many things when she first met him. Charming, confident, protective in a way that looked like devotion before it became control. He brought flowers to her job, remembered little details, called her beautiful in a way that made her feel chosen. He was the kind of man who opened doors in public and squeezed her wrist in private, the kind of man who smiled at her friends while quietly turning them against her, the kind of man who made jealousy sound like love, isolation sound like loyalty, and fear sound like a woman's overreaction. By the time Elena understood what he really was, she was already married, already financially dependent, already carrying his child, and already living in a house where the silence between his moods felt more dangerous than his shouting. That night, the rain had started just before her shift ended. Elena worked late cleaning offices in a downtown building after spending her day at a small diner on the edge of the city, taking orders with a smile that never reached her eyes. She had picked up Leah from a neighbor, rushed home, locked the door, checked the windows twice, and almost allowed herself to believe they had made it through another day unseen. but Victor had a talent for appearing just when her guard slipped. First came the pounding on the apartment door, then the sound of his voice, low and steady, the kind of voice that always frightened her more than screaming. Then the crash of wood splintering when the weak frame gave way. Elena didn't stop to think. She grabbed Leah, wrapped her in a blanket, and ran out the back stairs into the rain, not even realizing she had lost her shoes until the freezing pavement sliced at her feet. Behind her, Victor called her name the way a hunter might call to something already cornered. Calm, certain, possessive, as if she still belonged to him. Elena ran through alleys and side streets she barely knew, clutching her daughter so tightly Leah could hardly breathe. The little girl cried against her shoulder, asking where they were going, asking why Daddy was angry, asking the kind of questions that split a mother open inside, because there are some answers no child should ever hear. Elena's lungs burned. Her wet hair stuck to her face. Her left cheek still throbbed from where Victor had struck her hours earlier outside the building, when she thought she was alone. She had hidden that bruise from everyone at work with makeup and a fake smile, just as she had hidden so much for so long. But now there was no hiding left. She turned sharply into a narrow alley between two shuttered storefronts, hoping the darkness would cover them, hoping Victor's car would pass, hoping for a miracle she no longer believed in. For one brief second. All she could hear was the rain. Then headlights swung across the entrance like a spotlight. Victor's black sedan stopped at the mouth of the alley. The driver's door opened, and Elena felt the exact moment hope tried to leave her body. Victor moved toward her slowly, not because he needed to hurry, but because he wanted her to understand there was nowhere left to run. That was always his favorite part. The moment when fear became acceptance. He was soaked through, but his eyes were clear, sharp, almost amused. "You made this so much harder than it had to be," he told her. And even now, with his daughter trembling in Elena's arms, his voice carried that same poisonous calm. He didn't look like a monster to anyone passing by. He looked like a frustrated husband chasing a wife after an argument. That was part of what made him so dangerous. Men like Victor rarely looked like the evil they carried. They looked polished, believable, respectable. Elena backed deeper into the alley until cold brick met her spine. She tried to shield Leah with her own body. Victor stepped closer and reached for her arm. "Give me my daughter," he said. And when she refused, his face changed. It happened in a blink. The mask dropped. His hand shot out, fingers locking around Elena's wrist hard enough to make her cry out. Leah screamed. Elena twisted, trying to pull free, and Victor leaned in so close she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "If I can't have you," he whispered, "no one will." And then everything changed. Tires screamed at the mouth of the alley. Not one car, several. Black SUVs, sleek and silent until the final violent stop, doors opening in perfect rhythm. Men in dark suits stepped into the rain with the controlled speed of people who had done this before and never needed to raise their voices to be obeyed. Victor turned, still gripping Elena, confusion flashing across his face for the first time that night. One of the men moved fast enough to make him stumble backward. Another took position between Elena and the street. But none of them were the reason the air changed. The reason was the tall figure who stepped out last. He wore a dark overcoat that seemed untouched by panic, as if storms made room for him instead of the other way around. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He walked forward like a man who already owned the ending. And when Victor saw him clearly, the arrogance drained from his face so fast it was almost frightening. Because in that city, there were men feared by the police, men feared by judges, men feared by gangs. And then there was Dante Moretti. Elena had heard the name before, though only in fragments and whispers. In the diner where businessmen lowered their voices when they mentioned certain clubs downtown. In neighborhood rumors about black cars, private security, and powerful men who settled problems without ever appearing in court. In stories that painted him as untouchable, ruthless, and cold enough to make grown men rethink their loyalties. But stories don't prepare a woman for the first time she sees a man like that, standing 10 feet away, while the person who has terrorized her for years suddenly looks afraid. Dante's gaze never once left Victor. He took in the bruised face, the child, the grip on Elena's wrist, the blood on her bare feet. And something in his expression hardened into a silence more frightening than shouting. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, even, almost gentle in a way that made the words land harder. "Take your hand off her." Victor tried to recover, tried to sound like himself again. "This is none of your business." Dante took one more step forward, close enough now that even Elena could feel the force of him. Then he delivered the line that would replay in her head for months. "The next time you touch her," he said, "they won't find enough of you to bury." Victor let go. Not because he wanted to. Not because he had suddenly grown a conscience. He let go because for the first time in a long time, he understood what it felt like to be truly powerless. Elena stumbled backward, nearly collapsing. And one of Dante's men steadied her without touching more than necessary. Leah was crying so hard she could barely breathe, and Elena could feel her own heart pounding against the child's small body. Victor tried one last time, pointing at Elena like she was the problem, like he was the injured party, like all abusers do when the audience changes. "She's my wife," he snapped. Dante's face did not move. "No," he said. "She's the woman you should have prayed I never noticed." There was a pause then, and it was the kind of pause that tells you the next decision might decide whether someone lives through the night. Victor glanced at the men around him, at the dark vehicles, at the alley that had suddenly become a trap, and something primal told him survival mattered more than pride. He stepped back, then another step. And then he did the one thing Elena never thought she would see. He ran. For a long moment, no one moved. Rain fell in hard silver lines between the buildings. Elena stood frozen, clutching Leah, staring at the man who had just done what police reports, restraining requests, desperate phone calls, and months of fear had failed to do. He had made Victor afraid, truly afraid. Dante finally turned toward her, and for the first time, Elena got a clear look at him. He was older than Victor, broader, sharper, composed in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity. His face carried no wasted expression, but his eyes stopped on the bruise near her cheek, then on Leah, and something shifted there. Not softness exactly, but control tightening around anger. "Is she hurt?" he asked. It took Elena a second to realize he meant the child. She shook her head, unable to form words. Dante crouched slightly, lowering himself just enough so he wouldn't tower over Leah. He did not touch her. He simply spoke in the same calm voice. "You're safe now." The little girl hiccuped through tears and buried her face in Elena's neck, but she stopped screaming. Elena noticed it immediately. The most feared man in the city had spoken 4 words, and somehow her child believed him. If this had been any other story, this would be the moment the woman fell into the hero's arms and the danger ended. But real stories are rarely that kind. Real stories begin where fantasy usually stops, because Elena did not know whether the man standing in front of her was a savior or a different kind of threat. She had spent years learning how quickly charm could become control, how easily protection could turn into possession, how a woman in danger can be forced to choose between one kind of fear and another. Dante Moretti looked like the kind of man who could destroy lives with a phone call. The only reason that mattered less in that moment was because Victor Hayes had been doing it with his bare hands. Dante removed a card from inside his coat and held it out. No name, no company, just a number embossed in silver. "If he comes near you again," he said, "call this, day or night." Elena stared at the card without taking it. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw and unsteady. For the first time, Dante actually looked at her, not as a problem to solve, but as a woman standing in the wreckage of her own fear. His answer was simple. Because he should have been stopped a long time ago. That line should have comforted her. Instead, it planted the first question. What did he mean by that? Who was he really? How much did he know? And why did it sound like regret? Elena finally took the card with shaking fingers. She wanted to ask more, wanted to demand answers, wanted to understand why a man like this had appeared at the exact moment Victor had nearly dragged her back into hell. But survival was louder than curiosity. She needed to get her daughter somewhere warm. She needed to lock a door. She needed to breathe. Dante straightened, glanced once toward the alley entrance, and gave a subtle nod to his men. "Drive them home," one of the men said. Elena instantly stiffened. "No," she blurted. "No, I can get there myself." She expected pressure. She expected a command. Instead, Dante studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Fine, but you won't walk alone." There was something deeply unsettling about the fact that he accepted her refusal without argument. Men like Victor pushed. Men like Dante, she was beginning to understand, didn't need to. They simply arranged the world until it bent in the direction they wanted. As Elena stepped out of the alley with Leah in her arms and the card clenched in her hand, she didn't look back right away. She was afraid if she did, he would be gone, and the whole thing would feel like a fever dream, born from panic and rain and desperation. But when she finally turned at the corner, Dante was still there, standing in the alley under the storm as if he had stepped out of another life entirely. One of his men was speaking to him. But Dante's eyes followed her until she disappeared from view. That should have frightened her more than it did. It should have sent every alarm in her body screaming. Instead, what unsettled her most was the terrible, unfamiliar feeling spreading slowly beneath the fear. Relief. For the first time in months, she had watched Victor retreat. For the first time in years, another man had stepped in front of violence instead of explaining it away. And for the first time since she left her marriage, Elena Carter allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe she and her daughter were not completely alone. But the story did not end when she got home. In some ways, it had not even truly started. Because, while Elena locked her damaged apartment door that night, with a chair pushed under the knob, and held her daughter until the child finally slept, Victor Hayes was not giving up. Men like him do not surrender because they are humiliated once. They become more dangerous, more patient, more vicious. And somewhere else in that city, in an office high above streets slick with rain, Dante Moretti stood before a wall of security monitors and gave an order that would quietly change the course of Elena's life before sunrise. "Double the watch," he said. "No mistakes." He did not ask whether she had made it home. He already knew. He did not ask whether Victor would try again. He already knew that too. What Elena could not have imagined, as she sat in the dark with bruised wrists and a sleeping child, was that the man who had just saved her had not noticed her for the first time that night. He had been aware of her long before she ever saw him. Long before the alley. Long before the rain. Long before Victor realized someone far more dangerous had stepped into the game. And if Elena had known that, she might have run from Dante too, because the truth was far more complicated than a single rescue. The truth was that this would not be the last time Dante Moretti pulled her out of danger. It would not be the last time he arrived just before Victor crossed a line that could never be undone. It would not be the last time Elena would stand close enough to him to feel how carefully he controlled the rage inside him. And it would not be the last time she would wonder whether his protection came from honor, guilt, obsession, or something far more intimate than either of them were ready to name. In the weeks ahead, there would be another attack, then another. There would be a child who began to trust a man the city feared. There would be a mansion with locked gates and white marble floors. There would be nights when Elena woke in terror and found Dante outside her door like a silent promise. There would be a touch she didn't expect to crave, a confession she wasn't prepared to hear, and a secret so devastating it would make her question every moment of safety he gave her. He saved her life, but would loving him destroy it? That is where the real story begins. And if you think the worst thing Elena faced that night was Victor's hand around her wrist, stay with me. Because what happened after that first rescue is what turned a frightened single mother's fight for survival into a dangerous love story the city would never forget. She thought the rain was the hardest part. She thought the alley was the moment everything nearly ended. She was wrong. The hardest part was what came next, trusting the one man powerful enough to keep her safe, and terrifying enough to make her question what safety would cost. Because 3 nights later, when Victor came back for her in a way no one saw coming, Elena reached for the card Dante had given her, dialed the number with shaking hands, and heard a voice on the other end say 7 words that would change everything. "Mr. Moretti has been expecting your call." 3 nights after the alley, Elena Carter learned that fear has a way of changing shape. The first kind is loud and obvious, the kind that comes with broken doors, raised voices, and bruises you can cover with makeup if you are careful enough. The second kind is quieter. It sits in the silence after midnight when your child is finally asleep, and every creak in the floorboards sounds like a warning. It lives in the pause before your phone rings, in the shape of headlights lingering too long outside your window, in the terrible knowledge that a man who once knew the exact rhythm of your breathing also knows every place you might run when you're afraid. Elena had not slept properly since that night in the alley. She kept the silver-embossed card Dante Moretti had given her, tucked beneath the lamp beside her bed, staring at it every night as if it might answer questions she was too afraid to ask. She told herself she would never use it. She told herself that one terrifying rescue in the rain did not mean she owed her safety to a man whispered about in dark corners and expensive restaurants. But somewhere deep down, she also knew a truth she did not want to name. When Victor let go of her wrist in that alley, it was not because the law had stepped in. It was because one dangerous man had made another dangerous man back away. The apartment she and Leah were hiding in was barely fit for a fresh start, but it was all Elena could afford. The building sat on the edge of a neglected block, where landlords fixed things only when tenants threatened to leave, and tenants rarely had the money to leave. The hall lights flickered more often than they stayed on. The locks were old. The windows rattled when the wind picked up. The neighbor downstairs smoked on the fire escape and argued loudly on the phone at odd hours. The heating pipes groaned like they were alive. Yet for all its flaws, it had felt like freedom the day she moved in. It was the first place Victor had not chosen, the first place where every item in the kitchen was exactly where she wanted it, the first place where Leah had laughed in the living room without glancing nervously toward a doorway to see if Daddy was in a bad mood. Elena had spent months trying to make those 4 thin walls feel like a life instead of a hiding place. She pinned Leah's drawings to the refrigerator with cheap magnets. She bought second-hand curtains from a thrift store. She lit a vanilla candle in the evenings to mask the smell of damp carpet. She told herself that if she made it cozy enough, if she kept their routines steady enough, if she smiled often enough, maybe her daughter would stop asking why they couldn't go home. But freedom built on fear is fragile, and Victor had a talent for finding cracks. The first sign came the morning after the alley. Elena opened her apartment door to leave for the diner and found a single white rose on the welcome mat. No note, no card, just the flower, perfect and untouched, lying against peeling paint like a quiet threat. Her throat tightened immediately. Victor had brought her white roses when they were dating. He used to leave them on her windshield after arguments, or on the kitchen counter after nights that ended with tears and apologies. He always said white meant purity, forgiveness, starting over. In the end, Elena learned it really meant something else entirely. It meant he believed, no matter what he did, she would still be expected to come back clean, obedient, and grateful. She stared at the flower until the edges of her vision blurred. Then she picked it up with trembling fingers, snapped the stem in half, and threw it in the trash before Leah could see it. But all day long, the image followed her. A white rose on a dirty floor. Beauty delivered like a warning. By the time she finished her shift that evening, she had checked over her shoulder so many times that one of the older waitresses asked if she was feeling sick. Elena smiled, lied, and said she was just tired. She had become so practiced at lying about fear that sometimes even she almost believed herself. That night, she did what women in her position do far too often. She tried to carry on as if terror could be managed by routine. She made Leah macaroni and cheese from a box, listened to her chatter about a drawing she had made at the neighbor's place, bathed her, brushed her hair, and tucked her into bed with a story read in a voice so steady no one would know her hands were shaking. Then she checked the locks, then the windows, then the locks again. Then she sat at the tiny kitchen table under the buzzing light fixture with a mug of tea she never drank, the silver card in front of her, and the crushing exhaustion of a woman who knows she is one mistake away from being found. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a television blared. The city sounded ordinary, almost peaceful. And that, more than anything, made her uneasy. Victor never stayed quiet for long after being humiliated. He sulked, then he plotted. He apologized, then he punished. If he had truly walked away from the alley, it wasn't because he was done. It was because he was waiting for the right moment to make her regret surviving him. The lights went out just after midnight. 1 second the kitchen buzzed with that weak yellow glow, and the next the apartment dropped into darkness, so complete Elena stopped breathing. The building lost power often enough that it might have been nothing. But survivors of abuse learn to distrust coincidence. She sat perfectly still, listening. The refrigerator hummed off. The hallway noise disappeared. Even the rain seemed quieter. Then came the sound that froze her blood. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Not frantic, not angry, deliberate, as if the person on the other side knew exactly what the darkness was doing to her. Elena stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. Leah stirred in the bedroom. Another 3 knocks. Elena grabbed the first thing within reach, a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, and moved toward her daughter's room. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then Victor's voice slid through the dark wood like smoke. "Elena," he called softly, almost tenderly. "Open the door. You know I just want to talk." She stopped in the hallway, every muscle locking. The fear she had been holding back for days rose all at once. Because this was his favorite trick. He would speak gently until she opened the door, until she answered, until she gave him the smallest opening. And then he would become something else. "I brought something for Leah," he added. "Don't make me stand out here all night." Elena backed into the bedroom and shut the door without a sound. Leah was awake now, eyes wide and frightened in the dark. "Mommy," she whispered. Elena set the skillet down, climbed onto the bed, and pulled her close. "Listen to me," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "No matter what you hear, you stay right here. Do you understand?" The child nodded, already trembling. The knocks came again, louder now. Then the scrape of something metal at the front lock. Elena's mouth went dry. He had brought tools. Of course he had. She reached toward the lamp table, and her fingers closed around the card. For a second, she stared at it, the number catching what little light leaked in from the street. Every instinct in her screamed not to trust another powerful man. Every memory of Victor told her she no longer had the luxury of choosing between ideal options. She dialed with shaking hands, praying the line would connect before the lock gave way. It rang once, twice. Then a male voice answered, calm and immediate, as if someone had been waiting beside the phone. "Mr. Moretti's line." Elena swallowed hard. Her voice came out in a whisper. "He said to call if Victor came near me." There was no hesitation on the other end. "What is your address?" She gave it. The voice replied, "Stay inside the room. Do not open the door for anyone unless Mr. Moretti speaks to you himself. He is already on his way." Already on his way. Elena barely had time to process the words before the front lock snapped. The apartment door banged open so hard it hit the wall. Leah gasped and clung to Elena's shirt. Footsteps entered the living room. Slow, unhurried, confident. Victor was inside. "You know," he called, almost conversational, "if you had just answered your phone like a normal wife, none of this would be happening." He moved through the apartment like a man walking through his own property, kicking aside a toy, opening drawers, making noise on purpose so she could hear exactly how close he was getting. "I told you I'd be patient," he said, "but patience has limits." Elena held the phone so tightly her hand cramped. "Please hurry," she whispered. The voice on the line answered. "He's less than 2 minutes away." 2 minutes can feel like a lifetime when the person hunting you knows your fear like a language. Victor reached the bedroom door and rattled the knob. "Open it!" Elena said nothing. The knob twisted harder. "Don't do this in front of our daughter," he said, and even now, he made it sound like she was the one creating chaos. "You want her to remember you like this? Hiding from her father?" The bedroom door shook under the force of his fist. Leah buried her face against Elena and started crying. Elena closed her eyes for one terrible second and understood with brutal clarity that if Dante did not get there in time, this night would end in blood. The first gunshot Elena heard in her life did not come from a movie, a police show, or a distant street. It came from the hallway outside her apartment and split the silence so violently, Leah screamed. Victor jerked away from the bedroom door. Elena heard shouting, heavy footsteps, a body slamming into a wall, and then a voice she recognized immediately, even though she had only heard it a handful of times. On the floor. Dante. There was something about the way he said those 3 words that turned panic into stunned silence. Victor tried to protest. "You can't just—" The sentence ended in a choking grunt, as if someone had driven him face first into the floorboards. More voices flooded the apartment. Men. Controlled. Efficient. Furniture scraped. A drawer crashed open. Another command. Another thud. Then Dante's voice again. Closer now. Calmer than the situation had any right to be. "Elena, open the door." She froze. Every nerve lit. "How do I know it's you?" she called, hating the fear in her own voice. There was the briefest pause, and then he answered in the same measured tone. "Because the man outside your room is the one who ran from me in the rain." Something inside her unclenched. She opened the door. The scene beyond it looked like the aftermath of a storm. The apartment door hung crooked on its hinges. One of the lamps lay shattered. Victor was on the floor with his face pressed into the carpet, one of Dante's men pinning his arm behind his back, hard enough to make him curse. Another man stood by the broken front door watching the hallway. And in the center of the room, as if chaos rearranged itself around him, stood Dante Moretti. He wore a dark suit under a long coat, rain still glistening at the shoulders, his expression carved from the same hard control she remembered from the alley. But the moment his eyes found Elena, they shifted. Not soft. Not exactly, but sharply focused in a way that made her feel, for one disorienting second, like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. His gaze moved over her quickly, assessing. No new bruises. No blood. Then it dropped to Leah peeking from behind Elena's leg, face wet with tears. Dante crouched again. Just enough to lower himself to the child's level. "I told you before," he said quietly. "You're safe." Leah stared at him, then nodded the smallest amount. Elena could not explain why that nearly made her cry. Victor, however, had found his voice again. "You think you can take what's mine?" he spat, twisting against the grip holding him down. The words hit Elena like ice water. Mine. That had always been the heart of it. Not love. Ownership. Dante did not even look at him at first. He kept his attention on Elena, and when he finally spoke, it was to her. "Did he touch you tonight?" Elena shook her head. "Not yet." The answer made something dark pass through Dante's face, so quickly she almost wondered if she imagined it. Then he finally turned toward Victor. "You broke into her home," he said. "You cut the power to the building. You entered while a child was sleeping." His tone remained low, but every word landed like a verdict. Victor laughed, though it sounded more desperate than confident. "She's my wife. This is domestic. Stay out of it." Dante's eyes settled on him fully then, and for the first time, Elena saw what real fear looked like on Victor's face. "No," Dante said. "This is the last time you confuse cruelty with rights." He nodded once to his men. Victor was dragged to his feet so abruptly he stumbled. "Wait," Elena blurted before she could stop herself. Everyone looked at her. She hated that they did. She hated how small her voice sounded next to all that male power. "If he disappears," she said, swallowing hard, "they'll say I had something to do with it." It was an astonishing moment, because even now, after everything Victor had done, Elena was still thinking like a woman forced to survive systems built to doubt her. She was thinking about police reports, Neighbors' whispers, courtrooms, custody battles, the way women get blamed for the violence done to them if the man ends up worse off than expected. Dante studied her for a long second, and there was something almost unreadable in his face. Respect, maybe, or frustration at how much she still had to carry. "He won't disappear tonight," Dante said at last. Then he stepped toward Victor until only inches separated them. "Listen carefully," he said, so quietly that Victor had to lean in to hear him. "You will leave this building. You will go wherever men like you go when they are too cowardly to face what they've done. And you will spend every waking hour wondering when I decide that tonight should have ended differently. If you come within 50 feet of her again, if you call her, if you send flowers, if you let your shadow cross her path, you won't need a court to explain what happened. Do you understand me?" Victor's mouth opened, closed. Then, humiliatingly, he nodded. One of Dante's men released him, just enough for him to stand on his own feet. Victor looked at Elena then, hatred and humiliation and obsession burning in equal measure, and she knew in her bones this was not over. But for the first time, Victor knew she was no longer alone. After his men escorted Victor out, silence filled the apartment in strange waves. The adrenaline crash hit Elena so hard she nearly swayed. Dante noticed immediately. "Sit down," he said. It was not a barked order, just a firm instruction, but she bristled on instinct. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. Dante glanced at the broken door, the dark apartment, the terrified child, and then back at her. "No," he said. "You're not." It should have angered her, the way he saw through her so easily. Instead, it exhausted her. She sat on the edge of the sofa with Leia in her lap, while one of his men checked the windows and another restored the breaker in the hall. The lights flickered back on, revealing the full damage. Broken wood, scuffed walls, a toy rabbit overturned near the doorway, the kind of ordinary wreckage that follows extraordinary fear. Dante removed his coat and draped it over the back of a chair as if he intended to stay until the room itself calmed down. He did not crowd her. He did not hover. He simply remained present in a way that made Elena deeply uneasy, because she had forgotten what it felt like to have a man in the room who was not making everything worse. Leah, however, had no such defenses. Children often sense what adults argue themselves out of. She stared at Dante for several long seconds, then slipped out of Elena's lap and crossed the room with the solemn courage only little girls possess. Elena's heart jumped. "Leah!" she started, but the child had already stopped in front of him. Dante went still, as if he understood instinctively that sudden movement would frighten her. Leah looked up at him with those wide, dark eyes and asked the question that shattered whatever distance remained. "Are you the man who made Daddy go away?" Elena wanted to disappear. Dante's men pretended not to hear. Dante crouched slowly so they were eye level. "Yes," he said. Leah considered that with the seriousness of a child weighing the world. Then she reached into the pocket of her pajama pants, pulled out a tiny plastic bracelet made of mismatched beads, and held it out to him. "You can have this," she said. "So you come back if he does." Elena's breath caught. Dante stared at the bracelet like it was something far more dangerous than any weapon in the room. Then, carefully, almost reverently, he took it. "I'll keep it," he said, "and I'll come back." Something shifted in the apartment after that. It was subtle, but Elena felt it all the same. Dante Moretti, the man whose name moved through the city like a threat, stood in her shabby living room, holding a child's plastic bracelet around 2 fingers, as if he had just been handed a vow. The contrast was so startling it nearly unbalanced her. This was not the image of him that rumor had built in her mind. There was no arrogance in the moment, no smugness, no performance. Just a man with scars in places she couldn't see, speaking gently to a little girl who trusted him because he had done what no one else had done. He had shown up. And that was dangerous in a way Elena had not expected. Fear she understood. Gratitude she could survive. But gratitude mixed with relief, mixed with attraction, mixed with the fragile beginnings of trust. That was the kind of emotional territory women like her are warned never to enter too quickly. She had once mistaken intensity for love. She had once mistaken protection for devotion. She could not afford to be wrong again. Yet when Dante rose to his full height and turned toward her, there was a tension in the room that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the terrible possibility that some part of her already felt safer because he was there. He looked around the apartment once more, taking in the weak locks, the narrow windows, the damaged frame, the distance between the front door and the bedroom. He saw everything. "This place is compromised," he said. Elena stiffened instantly. "I'm not leaving." She heard how defensive she sounded and hated it. Dante did not react. "I didn't ask you to." That answer disarmed her more than if he had argued. He walked to the front door, tested the broken frame with one hand, then looked back. "But you won't stay here tonight." Elena rose so quickly Leah startled. "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "No, we're not going anywhere with you." One of his men shifted, maybe expecting pushback. Dante lifted a hand without looking at him, and the room stilled again. Then he turned fully toward Elena. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of anything except fact. "Victor cut power to the building. He entered your apartment while your daughter was sleeping. Your door is broken. He knows the layout. He knows you're alone. If he comes back before sunrise, this place will not protect you." Elena's throat tightened. She knew he was right. She hated that he was right. "I can go to a motel," she said. "I can call a friend." "Do you have one you trust enough to endanger?" he asked. The question landed like a blow because the answer was no. Victor had spent years helping isolate her. That was one of the first things men like him take. Your options. Dante's men repaired the front frame well enough to close it temporarily, but everyone in the room understood it was a gesture, not a solution. Elena moved through the apartment in a daze, packing an overnight bag while her mind screamed at her not to trust the man standing in her kitchen. She gathered Leah's favorite pajamas, a stuffed rabbit, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, medications, and the worn storybook her daughter insisted on sleeping with. The whole time, Dante remained at a distance, speaking quietly into his phone, issuing instructions that sounded like the movement of pieces on a board she couldn't see. At one point, she caught a phrase that made her pause. "No mistakes tonight," he said. Not, "make sure they're safe." Not, "help them." No mistakes. There was something about the wording that told her this was not an emotional reaction for him. It was operational, precise, practiced. That should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it made her wonder how many emergencies he had managed, how many people he had protected or punished, and why her survival seemed to matter enough that he had arrived himself both times. Men like Dante did not leave meetings in the middle of the night for strangers. Men like Dante did not stand in broken apartments holding plastic bracelets because it was convenient. Somewhere inside the fear, a question began to grow larger. Why her? The ride to the safe house was silent at first. Dante did not take them to a hotel. He did not take them to a police station. He did not take them to one of the obvious places Elena might have expected. Instead, the black SUV wound through sleeping streets, crossed the river, and turned into a gated property hidden behind tall stone walls and ironwork so elegant it looked expensive enough to belong in another life. When the gates opened, Elena's stomach dropped. This was not a temporary shelter. This was a private estate. Not his main home, she guessed, but one of those places powerful men keep for reasons ordinary people never fully understand. The driveway curved past dark hedges and old trees before ending at a low, beautifully restored house with warm lights glowing in the windows. The inside was immaculate, but not cold. Hardwood floors, soft lamps, a fireplace already lit, fresh blankets folded on the sofa. A tray with tea and warm milk waiting on the coffee table, as if someone had known exactly what a frightened mother and child would need at 2 a.m. Elena stood frozen just inside the door, overnight bag hanging from one hand, rain-damp hair still clinging to her neck. "What is this place?" she asked. "Safe," Dante said. That answer should have reassured her. Instead, it sharpened every instinct she had. Safe according to whom? Safe at what cost? Safe for how long? Yet when Leah yawned and leaned sleepily against her leg, Elena had to face the reality she kept trying to outrun. She had nowhere else to go tonight. No family close enough. No friends untouched by Victor's reach. No faith left in the systems that had already failed her. Dante saw the war in her face and said something that surprised her more than anything else that night. "You can leave at sunrise." There was no pressure in the words, no trap she could immediately hear. "My people will stay outside. No one comes in unless you ask. There's food in the kitchen. The bedrooms are upstairs. If you need anything, use the phone on the counter." Elena stared at him. "And you?" He held her gaze for one long, impossible second. "I'll be where he can't reach you." Then he turned to leave. It was such a simple thing, and yet it altered the emotional balance between them. He could have stayed. He could have used her vulnerability to make himself essential. He could have hovered, explained, inserted himself into the fragile intimacy of her fear. Instead, he gave her shelter and distance. Choice and protection in the same breath. That was what made him difficult to understand. Victor always took. Dante, so far, kept placing things in front of her and stepping back just far enough that she had to decide whether to reach for them. That is how trust begins when it is real. Not with grand declarations, but with the absence of pressure. Elena watched him move toward the door, coat back on, shoulders squared, every line of him carrying the strange restraint of a man who looked capable of violence, yet seemed to ration his presence around her. Leah, half asleep, and wrapped in the blanket someone had laid out, looked up and asked the question Elena was too proud and too shaken to say aloud. "Are you leaving?" Dante paused. "For tonight." Leah frowned. "What if Daddy comes?" Dante glanced back. And there was the faintest change in his face, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. "He won't," he said. "How do you know?" the child asked. Dante's answer came without hesitation. "Because now he knows I'm watching." After he left, Elena stood at the window for a long time, watching the taillights of his car disappear through the gate. She should have felt more afraid in a stranger's house. Instead, the deepest fear in her body remained tied to the possibility of Victor reaching her again, and for the first time since she fled her marriage, that fear had competition, exhaustion, relief, confusion, and the deeply inconvenient awareness that every time Dante stepped into a room, her breathing changed. She hated that. She hated how quickly a traumatized heart can attach meaning to protection. She hated how seeing him kneel in front of Leah had lodged itself somewhere tender inside her. She hated the thought that a man with his reputation could make her feel steadier than any officer, attorney, or judge ever had. Upstairs, she tucked Leah into a soft bed that smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. The child was asleep almost instantly, clutching the stuffed rabbit under her chin. Elena sat beside her for several minutes, just watching her breathe. Then she looked around the room and saw more details that unsettled her in a completely different way. Children's books already arranged on a shelf, a nightlight in the shape of a moon, extra pajamas in a neatly folded stack that somehow matched Leah's size almost perfectly. She touched the fabric and went cold. This had been prepared. Not in the last 10 minutes, earlier. By the time dawn touched the curtains, Elena had slept perhaps an hour. Her body had rested, but her mind hadn't. She kept replaying the apartment, the broken lock, Victor's voice in the dark, Dante's men appearing like a private army, the bracelet in his hand, the strange stillness of this house. When she finally went downstairs, she found breakfast already laid out. Fresh fruit, toast, scrambled eggs, orange juice for Leah, coffee for her. No staff in sight. No hovering security inside. Just the unmistakable sense that someone had anticipated her needs without forcing themselves into her space. It was almost worse than if he had stood there waiting. Because now she had to confront the possibility that Dante Moretti's interest in her had depth, planning, attention, knowledge. She was pouring coffee when the front door opened and he stepped in. Not rushed, not dramatic, just present, as if he had returned from handling a dozen dangerous things before most people woke up. He had changed clothes, dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked like the kind of man who belonged in boardrooms and back rooms at once. Elena set the mug down too hard. Why were there children's things upstairs? She asked immediately, skipping gratitude because suspicion felt safer. Dante glanced at the stairs, then back at her. Because I told them to prepare for your daughter. Elena stared. Before last night. He did not answer quickly enough. That pause told her more than a full confession might have. You expected this, she said. You knew he'd come after me again. Dante's jaw tightened slightly. I knew men like him don't stop when they're embarrassed. That's not what I asked, her voice sharpened. Why did you have a room ready? For the first time since she met him, there was a flicker of something in Dante's expression that looked dangerously close to honesty. Because I've been trying to keep ahead of him. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her. How long? He held her gaze. Long enough to know you weren't safe. She should have been furious. She was a little. But beneath the anger came a wave of something far harder to manage. The awful realization that someone had seen how bad things were, even when she was still trying to minimize them herself. You were watching me, she asked, barely above a whisper. Watching him, Dante corrected, and making sure you stayed alive. The distinction should have comforted her. It didn't. That doesn't make it less unsettling. I know. He said it so simply that her next argument died in her throat. Leah came running downstairs before Elena could decide whether to keep fighting or demand answers she wasn't ready to hear. The child's hair was wild from sleep, and she stopped when she saw Dante in the kitchen like he belonged there. Then, with the blunt sincerity only children have, she smiled. You came back. Dante looked at her the way he had in the apartment, as if the smallness of her somehow required him to become more careful. I said I would. Leah nodded solemnly, satisfied and climbed into a chair. Elena watched the exchange with an ache she could not name. Victor had spent years turning promises into weapons. Dante made them sound like facts. Breakfast passed in strange, fragile quiet. Leah chatted about pancakes and cartoons, while Elena and Dante spoke only when necessary. Yet beneath every small practical exchange was a current so charged it made ordinary words feel heavier than they should. "More juice?" "Thank you. Your phone was damaged in the apartment. A new one is on the counter." "You bought me a phone?" "Temporary. I didn't ask for one. You need a secure line." The more he did, the more Elena's pride rose to defend what remained of her independence. But fear kept whispering the same thing. He was doing what survival required, and that was the cruelest part. The man she did not trust kept being right. After breakfast, Dante drove them back to the apartment himself. Elena insisted. She needed to collect more things. She needed to see the place in daylight. She needed to prove to herself she still had agency. The building looked worse under the sun. The broken door had been repaired enough to shut, but the frame was splintered. Neighbors peered through curtains. Someone had already started gossiping. In the hallway, Elena found a police card wedged near the mailbox from an officer who had responded after Dante's men were long gone. It was absurd in a way that would have been funny if her life were not at stake. Official help arriving late enough to document damage after private power had prevented it. She gathered clothes, medications, Leah's school papers, and the small box of keepsakes she had hidden in the back of her closet. She moved quickly, but not quickly enough to miss the envelope shoved under her door. No stamp, no address. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a photo. A picture of her and Leah leaving the diner the previous afternoon, taken from across the street. On the back, in Victor's handwriting, were 6 words. "You can't hide from family." Elena went so cold she nearly dropped it. Dante took the photo from her before she could stop him. He looked at it once, and something in the room changed. There are moments when a man's anger is so tightly contained it becomes more frightening than shouting. Dante did not curse. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his fist into a wall. He simply looked at the photograph for a long second, then slipped it into his inside pocket with a calm that made Elena's stomach knot. "We're done here," he said. Elena blinked. "I still need—" "No," he said, and this time the force in the word stopped her. He immediately seemed to regret the edge in his tone, because when he spoke again, it was quieter. "You have what matters." Elena looked around the apartment that had cost her so much to build into something livable. The thrift store curtains, the second-hand dishes, the framed photo of Leah in a pumpkin patch, the life she had pieced together with pennies and pride. And she understood, with a grief that felt embarrassingly sharp, that he was right. Victor had found the place. He had crossed the threshold. He had left proof that he could still see them when she thought she was hidden. Whatever fragile version of safety those walls once offered was gone. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, and the second the words left her mouth, she hated how much they sounded like surrender. Dante met her eyes. "With me." He did not say it dramatically. He did not make it sound like a seduction or a command. Yet those 2 words landed with more force than any threat Victor had ever made, because Elena understood immediately what he meant. Not the safe house. Not one more night behind someone else's locked gate. Something bigger, more permanent, more dangerous in an entirely different way. "No," she said before he could explain. "Absolutely not." Dante waited. "Hear me out." "I don't need to hear you out." Her pulse was pounding. You want me to move into your house? Until he's handled? Handled, she repeated, horrified. Do you hear yourself? Yes. His voice remained maddeningly calm. Do you? Elena almost laughed from the sheer pressure of it. You think the answer to my abusive ex stalking me is for me and my daughter to move into a Mafia boss's mansion? One of his men, standing discreetly in the hall, looked like he might choke trying not to react. Dante, infuriatingly, did not. I think the answer, he said, is to place you somewhere Victor cannot reach, under protection he cannot buy, threaten, or outmaneuver. And you think that place is with you? I know it is. The certainty in his voice made her angry, because some part of her wanted to believe him. She should have walked away then. Any reasonable person would say so. She should have taken Leah, found a shelter in another county, changed her name, disappeared into a town where no one knew Dante Moretti or Victor Hayes. But real fear narrows choices until unreasonable things begin to look practical. Victor had already tracked her once after she moved. Then again. He had broken into her apartment. He had photographed her child. He had cut the building power. He had no intention of stopping. And every time he escalated, Dante appeared faster than the systems designed to protect her. That was the unbearable truth sitting between them in the wrecked apartment. Elena could argue with Dante's methods. She could distrust his world. She could resent his control, his surveillance, his impossible certainty. But she could not deny the evidence of what had happened twice now. Why? She asked at last, her voice quieter than before. Why do you care this much? The question hung in the apartment like smoke. Dante's gaze held hers. For a second, just one, the controlled mask slipped enough for her to see the man underneath it. Tired, determined, carrying something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. Because I should have protected you sooner, he said. That answer hit Elena harder than she expected, because it was not the answer of a man trying to impress her. It was the answer of a man admitting failure. And it raised more questions than it resolved. Sooner than what? Sooner than the alley? Sooner than the break-in? Sooner than the first bruise? How much did he know? How long had he been aware of Victor? How long had she been moving through the city under the gaze of a man she had never seen until the night he stepped out of the rain? Elena wanted to demand everything. Instead, all she could manage was a whisper. What does that mean? Dante's jaw tightened again. It means I know what he is. That's not enough. It's all I'm giving you right now. The honesty of that answer made her angrier and more curious all at once. He was not pretending transparency. He was telling her, plainly, that there were things he was withholding, in some twisted way that made him easier to believe than Victor ever had. Liars perform openness. Dangerous, truthful men ration it. Leah tugged on Elena's sleeve then, holding her stuffed rabbit and looking between them with a child's intuition. Can we go with him? She asked. Elena closed her eyes for a second. Of course. Of course, the decision that would define the next chapter of her life would be made harder by the one small person whose safety mattered more than her pride. By the time the sun dipped low that evening, Elena Carter stood outside the gates of Dante Moretti's main estate with 2 suitcases, a sleeping child, and the awful understanding that her life had just crossed a line it might never uncross. The gates were taller than the ones at the safe house. Black iron. Stone pillars. Cameras hidden so well she only noticed them when they moved. The driveway curved through immaculate grounds toward a mansion that looked less like a home and more like a fortress, dressed as luxury. Marble columns, tall windows, soft golden lights behind glass, the kind of place magazines call elegant and women like Elena call impossible. She sat in the back seat of the SUV, hands clenched so tightly around the strap of her bag that her knuckles hurt. She had said yes, but only after hours of arguing, crying in private, trying to list alternatives she no longer believed in. She had made rules, temporary, separate rooms, no secrets involving Leah, no one touching her child without permission. Dante had agreed to everyone without flinching. That should have comforted her. Instead, it made him harder to predict. When the gates opened and the car rolled forward, Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach, because she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that the most dangerous part of her story had not been the alley, or the apartment, or even Victor's threats. The most dangerous part was this: choosing to trust the one man powerful enough to save her, and possibly powerful enough to ruin her if she was wrong. If Elena had known what was waiting inside that mansion, she might have told the driver to turn around before the doors ever opened. She might have grabbed Leah and run before the staff lined up in silence, before the chandeliers glowed over white marble, before she saw the room that had already been prepared for her daughter, before she felt the first, unmistakable pull of a man who was terrifying to the world and impossibly gentle with the child in his arms. Because once she crossed that threshold, the story stopped being about a woman escaping an abusive ex and became something far more complicated. There would be locked wings and whispered resentment from people who thought she didn't belong there. There would be late-night conversations in dark kitchens, wounds she did not know Dante carried, and a tenderness that would frighten her more than any threat. There would be another attack, another secret. And before long, Elena would realize the man guarding her door at night was not only risking his empire to keep her safe, he was falling for her. And the moment she understood that, the real danger would begin. Because in the next part of this story, safety turns into closeness, gratitude turns into desire, and Elena begins to see the side of Dante Moretti no one else ever does. But just when she starts to believe she and her daughter might finally have a future, one devastating truth about Victor, and Dante's connection to him, threatens to destroy everything. The first night Elena Carter slept under Dante Moretti's roof, she did not sleep at all. She lay awake in a bed softer than anything she had touched in years, in a room bigger than her entire apartment, listening to the unfamiliar silence of wealth and security, and wondering why it felt so much like standing at the edge of a cliff. The house was too still. No arguing through thin walls, no sirens close enough to rattle the windows, no pipes groaning, no footsteps from strangers in the hallway. Just the muted hum of climate control, the occasional distant shift of a guard outside, and the terrifying awareness that safety, when you've lived without it long enough, can feel almost as unsettling as danger. Leah, however, adapted instantly. Children often do. Within minutes of seeing the room prepared for her, with its soft blankets, storybooks stacked neatly on the shelf, art supplies on the desk, and a small lamp shaped like a moon, she had looked at Elena with the kind of shy wonder only children can carry and whispered, "Is this really for me?" Elena had no answer that made sense, because none of it made sense. Not the room, not the staff who moved quietly and respectfully as if they had been instructed not to overwhelm them, not the way Dante had stood back while Elena checked every corner herself before letting Leah inside. Not the fact that he had agreed to every boundary she set without argument. A man like Victor would have taken offense. A man like Dante simply listened, nodded and said, "You decide what makes you comfortable, That should have made her trust him more. Instead, it made him more difficult to understand, and anything difficult to understand can become dangerous if a woman has already learned the price of being wrong. By the second morning, Elena had begun to notice the strange rhythm of life inside the mansion. It was not chaotic, despite the size of the estate and the number of people moving through it. It was controlled, precise. Staff appeared before she needed something, and vanished before she could feel watched. Meals arrived on schedule. The grounds were patrolled with the quiet efficiency of men trained not merely to guard, but to anticipate. Doors that should have felt imposing were somehow left open when she approached, as if someone had ordered the house itself not to make her feel trapped. Yet beneath all that careful accommodation was an undeniable truth. This was Dante's world. Every polished hallway, every marble staircase, every low-voiced instruction from security, every subtle glance from the household staff reminded her that she had stepped into a place built around one man's power. And power, Elena knew better than most, always comes with a price. She moved cautiously, keeping Leah close, insisting on doing small things herself just to preserve some fragile sense of independence. She unpacked their bags with more force than necessary. She folded her daughter's clothes into drawers she never thought they would use. She refused help from the housekeeper, assigned to the floor, until the older woman, with kind eyes and a thick New York accent, simply smiled and said, "Honey, I'm not here to control you. I'm here because he told everybody in this house that if anyone makes you uncomfortable, they answer to him." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. It was both comforting and frightening, which was somehow worse. Dante did not crowd her. That was the first thing Elena noticed, and the thing that made his presence more intense, not less. He was around, but never where she could accuse him of hovering. He was at the long dining table for breakfast, usually already halfway through black coffee, and whatever crisis he handled through quiet phone calls before sunrise. He was in the study down the east corridor, with men who spoke to him in short, careful sentences. He was on the grounds at dusk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, walking the perimeter with the head of security, as if the safety of the estate was not something he delegated lightly. And every time Elena saw him, he seemed to know exactly how close he could stand before her body remembered too much. He kept a measured distance. He asked before entering any room she was in if the door was closed. He knocked even on doors that were technically his. It should have made him feel formal. Instead, it made him feel dangerous in a completely different way. Respect can be intoxicating to someone who has lived with violation. The first time he found her in the kitchen at midnight, barefoot and unable to sleep, he did not ask why she was awake. He simply stepped around her to the stove, poured warm milk into a small saucepan, added cinnamon without a word, and set the mug in front of her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Leah was restless, he said. This helped when she woke from bad dreams at the safe house. Elena stared at him. How do you know she had bad dreams? He held her gaze. Because I checked. The answer should have sounded intrusive. Somehow, in his voice, it sounded like responsibility. The intimacy did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, small moments, the kind that sneak past a woman's defenses because they don't look like seduction. They look like care. Dante carried Leah when she fell asleep in the library with a coloring book in her lap, and set her in bed, with a gentleness Elena would have sworn impossible if she had not seen it herself. He noticed when Elena favored her left wrist because Victor had bruised it badly and had a doctor come to the house under the pretense of checking everyone after a security incident. He left the room when she changed and sent in a female nurse instead. He had someone replace the cheap shampoo Elena had brought in her bag with the exact brand she used to buy before Victor took over their finances. And when she demanded how he knew, he only said, "You used to stop at the pharmacy on Lexington every third Thursday." It was too much, too specific, too revealing. She stood in the bathroom, holding the bottle like it was evidence, and felt a cold shiver of awareness run down her spine. He had been watching her, longer than she understood, closely enough to know habits she barely noticed herself. When she confronted him, he did not deny it. He stood in the doorway of his study, expression unreadable, and said, "If you want me to tell my men to pull back, I will." Elena stared at him. "You say that like I have a choice." His eyes darkened, just slightly. "You always have a choice here." The terrible thing was that he meant it. The even more terrible thing was that she was starting to believe him. Leah became the bridge neither of them intended. Children do not care about tension the way adults do. They care about consistency, safety, who shows up when they're scared. Within days, Leah had decided Dante was a permanent fixture in the universe, like the moon lamp in her room or the warm pancakes the cook made on Sundays. She began waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs in the mornings, small hands gripping the banister, announcing in a whisper shout when she heard his footsteps, "He's coming." She asked if he would read to her. She asked if he would watch her draw. She asked if he knew how to braid hair, which made Elena almost laugh for the first time in weeks. He did not. He learned anyway. The first attempt was disastrous. Leah's hair came out uneven and loose, and Elena had to fix it while trying not to smile. Dante watched her fingers move through the little girl's curls and said, very quietly, "You make everything look easy." The words landed harder than compliments ever had from Victor, because there was no manipulation in them, no setup, no expectation attached. Just observation. Truth. Elena kept her eyes on Leah's hair and ignored the way her pulse shifted. But that night, when she tucked her daughter in and Leah sleepily mumbled, "I like it here because he looks at you different," Elena had to sit down on the edge of the bed because the room suddenly felt unsteady. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Leah shrugged, already drifting toward sleep. "Daddy looked at you like he was mad. Dante looks at you like he's scared." Children, Elena realized with a sharp ache in her chest, often understand adults more clearly than adults understand themselves. The first time Elena and Dante nearly crossed the line between guarded gratitude and something neither of them could take back. It happened during a storm. Rain hammered against the tall windows just after midnight, the kind of hard, relentless rain that rattles glass and makes the world outside disappear. Elena had been asleep for perhaps an hour when thunder cracked so violently it pulled her straight into a memory. Victor shouting, a lamp breaking, Leah crying in the next room, her own body pinned between wall and rage. By the time she opened her eyes, she was no longer fully in the present. Her breathing turned shallow, her skin went cold. Her hands shook so badly she knocked the water glass from the bedside table. It shattered on the floor. She could hear herself making a sound she hated, that small, helpless gasp of a body, remembering fear faster than the mind can reason through it. The door opened a second later. Dante was there. Of course he was. For one disorienting instant, his silhouette in the doorway triggered the wrong instinct, and Elena flinched backward so hard she hit the headboard. He stopped immediately, every line of him going still. "It's me," he said, low and steady. "Look at me." She couldn't. She was shaking too hard. "Elena." He did not move closer. "Count 5 things you can see." The command cut through the panic, just enough to make her focus. "I can't." "Yes, you can." still calm, still measured. Start with the lamp. Her eyes found it, then the curtains, then the dresser, then the broken glass, then him. He waited until her breathing shifted before stepping closer. Slow, deliberate, no sudden movements. "Can I touch you?" he asked. The question, so simple and so respectful, nearly undid her. She nodded once. He sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders before he touched her skin, giving warmth before contact, then placed one hand lightly at the back of her neck and the other over her trembling fingers. Not gripping, not restraining, anchoring. "You're here," he said. "You're safe. The storm is outside. Not in this room." She wanted to be stronger than this, wanted to hate that the one person who could calm her was the man she still did not fully understand. But trauma has no respect for pride. She leaned into him before she realized she had made the choice. For one breath, then another, until her forehead rested against his chest, and she could hear the slow, steady beat of his heart under the thin fabric of his shirt. It was absurd how much that sound mattered. Dante did not say anything for a long time. He just stayed. One hand at the back of her head, fingers moving once through her hair in a gesture so careful it felt almost sacred. When her shaking eased, he tipped her face up with a touch so light she could have pulled away. Their eyes met. Close now. Far too close. His thumb brushed the dampness beneath her eye. She stopped breathing. He did too. There was a whole world inside the silence between them. Want, fear, restraint, a promise neither of them had spoken. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Hers dropped to his. And just as the space between them narrowed enough to become dangerous, the house alarm exploded. Some moments change a story because of what happens. Others change it because of what almost happens. The alarm that tore through the mansion saved them from a kiss, but it also destroyed whatever illusion remained that they could keep pretending the tension between them was accidental. Dante was on his feet instantly, every trace of softness gone behind hard focus. "Stay here," he said. Elena grabbed his wrist before he could move. "Don't leave me in the dark again." The words slipped out, raw and honest. And for the briefest second, his expression shifted. Something fierce, protective, personal. "Then come with me," he said. And before she could argue, he guided her and Leah, who was already awake and crying from the alarm, into a secure room behind a concealed door off the hallway. The hidden panel alone should have frightened Elena, but she barely registered it through the rush of adrenaline. Inside the room were monitors, reinforced walls, emergency lighting, bottled water, first aid supplies, and 2 armed guards who straightened the second Dante entered. "No one opens this door unless I say so," he told them. Then he looked at Elena. "There's been a perimeter breach." Her stomach dropped. "Victor?" "Maybe." The word hit harder than certainty. He crouched in front of Leah, who was shaking in her blanket. "Listen to me," he said. "You stay with your mum. You be brave for me." The little girl nodded tearfully. Then he stood and looked at Elena one last time. No softness now, but something more intense. "Trust me." Before she could answer, he was gone. What followed lasted less than 20 minutes and felt like an hour. Elena sat on the floor with Leah in her lap, watching security feeds flicker across the monitors while men with earpieces moved through the grounds in tight, coordinated patterns. Rain slashed across the cameras. A shadow moved near the outer wall. A guard shouted. Then static. Then a side view of one of the east gates, where a figure in dark clothing vaulted a hedge and ran. "That's not Victor," one of the guards muttered before he could stop himself. Elena's head snapped up. What do you mean, not Victor? The guard's mouth tightened. He had said too much. Ma'am, what do you mean? She demanded, louder this time. Before he could answer, another voice crackled over the radio. Suspect down. Secondary at the south wall. Possible internal access. Internal access. The words hit Elena in a way that had nothing to do with the intruder outside. Someone inside had helped. Someone within Dante's walls had opened a path. The room felt colder instantly. She looked at the reinforced door and understood with terrifying clarity that fortresses are only as safe as the people who live behind the gates. When Dante returned, rain-soaked and furious in a way she had not yet seen, he looked less like a man and more like a storm given human form. There was blood on his cuff. Not much, but enough to make Elena's pulse leap. "Are you hurt?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes found hers immediately. Not mine. The answer should have reassured her. It did, and it didn't. Because the moment he said it, she realized how deeply she cared whether he was bleeding. The breach changed the atmosphere of the mansion overnight. Security doubled. Staff whispered. Doors that had once stood open were now watched more closely. Dante moved Elena and Leah to a private wing adjacent to his own rooms, which would have horrified her if the fear of an inside leak had not already done the work. "This is temporary," he said, as if he could read the protest forming in her throat. "Until I know who opened that gate." She wanted to argue, but she had seen the footage. Someone inside had betrayed the perimeter. Temporary became the word both of them used for things neither was ready to define. Temporary rooms. Temporary protection. Temporary late-night talks that stretched longer than intended. Temporary glances that lingered too long over morning coffee. Temporary silence when their hands brushed over the same plate in the kitchen and neither moved away quickly enough. The wing he moved them into was quieter, more private, with a sitting room between Elena's room and Leah's, and a corridor that led, far too conveniently, toward Dante's office. The first night there, Elena woke at 3 a.m. to get water and found him sitting in a chair outside the door, jacket folded over the back, tie gone, sleeves rolled, a gun on the side table, and a file open in his lap. He looked up instantly, alert even from stillness. "You're sleeping out here?" she whispered, "until the leak is closed." She stared at him. "You have an entire army." And yet someone still reached the wall. His gaze held hers. "I'm not making that mistake twice." She should have gone back to bed. Instead, she stood there in the dim hall, barefoot and wrapped in a robe, looking at the man guarding her door like the possibility of losing her had become personal. The jealousy entered the story through a woman named Bianca Russo, though Elena did not understand the full weight of that name at first. Bianca had been present since the beginning, always in the background of dinners or strategy meetings, dressed impeccably, moving through the mansion with the easy confidence of someone who had belonged there long before Elena arrived. She was beautiful in a polished, dangerous way, and carried herself like a woman who had never once been denied what she wanted. For days, she was civil enough to make Elena doubt her own instincts. Then the little cuts began. A comment about how guests should notify staff before using the West Terrace. A look at Elena's borrowed dress before a formal dinner that lingered half a second too long. A remark about how difficult it must be to adjust when one isn't used to this level of privacy. Elena had spent enough years with Victor to recognize contempt hidden inside manners. But the real crack came one afternoon when Bianca found her in the library while Leah colored at a low table nearby. "You should be careful," Bianca said, picking up a book she had no intention of reading. Men like Dante are very good at making women feel protected. Elena stiffened. And women like you are very good at pretending concern when they mean something else. Bianca smiled faintly. I know him better than you think. Then you know he doesn't like games. Bianca's smile thinned. No, he likes control. There's a difference. The words lodged in Elena's chest because they echoed a fear she had been fighting since the moment she arrived. When Bianca left, Leah looked up from her crayons and asked, "Why doesn't that lady like us?" Elena had no answer that wouldn't make a child older too fast. If the alarm had cracked the illusion of safety, the truth that came next shattered it. It happened in the worst possible way. Not through a confession, but through overheard fragments. Elena was on her way back from checking on Leah one evening when raised voices carried down the corridor from Dante's study. She would have kept walking if she hadn't heard Victor's name. She stopped, every muscle going rigid. The door was not fully closed. Inside, Dante stood by the desk, expression carved from anger, while one of his lieutenants, an older man named Sal, looked more nervous than Elena had ever seen him. "You should have finished it years ago," Sal said in a harsh whisper. "The second Hayes put his hands on one of the girls in Queens, you should have ended him." Elena's heart slammed. One of the girls in Queens? Finished him? Dante's voice came low and dangerous. "I told him to disappear, and he didn't." Sal stepped closer. "He changed his name, got clean for 6 months, charmed a woman, got married, and now look where we are. You knew what he was. You let him walk." Elena's breath caught so sharply it hurt. She took a step back, but too late. The floorboard betrayed her. Silence fell inside the study. The door opened a second later. Dante stood there, eyes locking onto hers, and for the first time since she met him, he looked like a man who knew he had lost control of the narrative. Elena could barely speak. "You knew him," she whispered. "Not a question. A wound. There are truths that hurt because they reveal danger. And then there are truths that hurt because they force you to reinterpret every moment of safety that came before." Elena stepped into the study because, if she had not, she might have collapsed in the hallway. "How long?" she asked, though she already knew enough to be terrified by the answer. Dante shut the door behind her. "Before you." Her vision blurred at the edges. "Before me?" Her voice rose. "Before I met him? Before he hit me? Before he broke into my home? Before he terrified my daughter?" Dante's jaw clenched. "Elena, don't." She backed away as if distance might make the room breathe again. "Don't say my name like you have any right to calm me down." He looked like he wanted to cross the space between them, and knew he couldn't. "Victor Hayes used to work in a logistics chain tied to one of my businesses," he said. "He was low level, useful until he wasn't. Then he got violent, not with me. With women? I had him removed." "Removed?" she repeated bitterly. "What does that even mean in your world?" "It means I told him to disappear." "You told him?" The laugh that escaped her was sharp and broken. "You told an abuser to disappear, and when he didn't, he found me." Dante's silence was its own confession. "You knew what he was capable of," she said, each word colder than the last. "And you did nothing." "I was wrong," he said, and there was something raw in the admission that almost made it worse. "I thought fear would keep him away." "Fear?" Elena stared at him. "You gambled with women's lives because you thought fear was enough?" That was the moment the foundation cracked, not because Dante lied. In some terrible way, his honesty was part of the damage. He was not inventing excuses. He was admitting he had made a choice years ago, and that choice had left a monster alive long enough to build a life around Elena before the violence surfaced. "So every time you showed up," she whispered, tears burning hot now, "every time you rescued me, every time you looked at me like you were the only one who understood what I'd been through, was that because you cared, or because you were cleaning up your own mess?" The question hit him hard enough that she saw it. Really saw it. For the first time, the controlled, untouchable Dante Moretti looked almost undone. "It started because I was responsible," he said quietly. "It stopped being only that a long time ago." She hated the way her heart reacted to those words, hated that some part of her believed him. "You don't get to say that now." Her voice broke. "Not after this." He took a step forward and stopped himself. "I should have told you sooner. You should have told me before you ever brought my daughter into this house." That landed like a knife. Dante went still. Elena wiped at her tears angrily. "I trusted you." The confession escaped before she could stop it, and because it was true, it hurt more than any accusation. "That was my mistake." Then she did the one thing he clearly feared more than her anger. She turned and walked out. If stories like this were simple, that would have been the end of them. The woman would leave. The dangerous man would watch her go. The lesson would be clean and moral and easy to narrate. But trauma, desire, gratitude, and love do not untangle themselves on command. Elena packed that night, not because she had anywhere safe to go, but because staying in the room next to Dante's after learning the truth felt impossible. She moved with shaking hands while Leah slept, folding clothes into a suitcase through tears she kept angrily wiping away. Every item she touched carried memory now. The pajamas he had provided. The book Leah loved because he had read it in that low, steady voice. The sweater she had worn the night he sat outside her door. Safety had become contaminated by truth, and Elena didn't know how to separate one from the other. She was zipping the suitcase when a knock came at the door. 3 soft taps. Familiar now. "Go away," she said. Silence. Then, "I can't." She almost laughed from sheer disbelief. "Watch me." The door stayed closed. So did he. "There's movement at the south perimeter," he said. Elena froze. "What?" "I need you in the secure room. Now." She wanted to think it was a trick, wanted to accuse him of using danger to force proximity. Then she heard the first distant shout from outside. Real. Urgent. Too close. Dante's voice sharpened. "Elena." She opened the door. He looked exactly the way he had in the aftermath of the first breach. Controlled, armed, all softness, stripped away by necessity. But this time there was something else in his face. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "Take Leah," he said. "We move now." Elena's anger had no room to survive the rush of adrenaline. She grabbed her daughter, still half asleep and confused, and followed him into the corridor. Security was already in motion. Radios crackled, footsteps thundered below. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. "How did they get in?" Elena demanded. Dante's mouth hardened. "They didn't. Someone opened the service gate." Internal access again. The betrayal was still inside the walls. They were halfway to the secure room when the first shot rang out from the lower hall. Leah screamed. Dante pivoted instantly, pulling Elena and the child behind him with one arm, while his other hand came up with the gun. "Back," he ordered, voice like steel. Another shot. A vase exploded at the far end of the corridor. Men shouted. One of Dante's guards dropped to a knee, firing toward the staircase. The mansion that had looked like elegance and safety now felt like a battlefield built of marble and secrets. Dante pushed Elena toward the concealed door. "Inside! Lock it!" She stared at him. "Come with us." For 1 second, their eyes locked. "If I do, they reach you." It was the same impossible logic as before. She hated it because she knew it was true. "Dante, inside." The command hit harder because it carried panic he was trying to hide. She moved. From inside the secure room, the next minutes came in fragments and static. Elena sat on the floor with Leah clutched so tightly the child whimpered, watching camera feeds flicker as armed men moved through the corridors. One intruder went down near the east stairwell. Another appeared on the kitchen level. Then the screen at the service gate showed something that made Elena's blood stop. Victor. Not a rumor. Not a possibility. Victor himself, moving fast through the rain with the kind of desperate confidence only obsession gives a man. "No," Elena whispered. Leah looked up. "Mommy?" Elena could barely breathe. Victor was here, inside the estate, inside the one place that was supposed to be beyond his reach. And then, on another camera, she saw something even worse. Bianca. Standing near the open service access, one hand on the keypad, her face pale and stricken as Victor shoved past her. Elena's mind raced. Had Bianca done this willingly? Had she been manipulated? It barely mattered in the moment. The gate had opened. The monster was inside. The next feed caught Dante moving down the main corridor with 2 men at his back, shoulders set. Eyes locked ahead with a focus so lethal it made Elena shake. Then the image cut. Static. "No, no, no." She lunged for the intercom. "Dante!" Only hiss answered. Somewhere outside the reinforced walls, a gunshot cracked close enough to rattle the shelves. Victor found them because obsession makes men reckless, and women like Elena predictable in all the ways survival demands. He knew she would be in the safest room. He knew Dante would hide her where access was restricted. What he did not know was that even the safest rooms have weaknesses if someone on the inside is desperate enough to reveal them. The panel beside the secure room door beeped once. Then again. One of the guards swore under his breath and moved into position. "He has override code." Elena's head snapped up. "What? He shouldn't." The guard's face went grim. The lock flashed red, then amber. Then the outer hall erupted in gunfire so loud Leah screamed and buried her face in Elena's chest. The guard fired through the door the second it opened a crack. A body hit the floor outside. Another shot answered. The second guard went down with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Smoke drifted through the widening gap. And then Victor's voice, ragged and furious and terrifyingly close. "Elena!" The world narrowed to one point of horror. The first guard tried to shove the door closed again, but a boot jammed it open. Victor forced his way through like something dragged out of a nightmare. Wet hair, wild eyes, blood on his sleeve that may not have been his. He looked less like a man, and more like the version of him Elena had always feared would one day appear, if no one stopped him. He saw her, and everything in his face changed. Relief, possession, madness. "There you are," he said, almost tenderly. "I knew he'd hide you somewhere pretty." The wounded guard raised his weapon. Victor fired first. The man dropped. Elena grabbed the nearest object, a metal lamp from the side table, and swung with every ounce of strength she had left. The lamp connected with Victor's shoulder, hard enough to stagger him. It was not enough to stop him, but it was enough to remind Elena of something important. She was not the same woman who had cowered in hallways, waiting for him to choose whether tonight would be bad. She had survived too much to freeze now. Victor roared and lunged, catching her by the wrist. Leah screamed. Elena twisted, driving her knee upward with a force born from terror and fury. He grunted, loosened just enough, and she shoved Leah behind the overturned sofa. "Stay down!" she screamed. Victor recovered fast, faster than she wanted, and backhanded her so hard stars burst across her vision. She hit the floor, tasting blood. "You think he loves you?" Victor spat, advancing. "You think a man like that saves women? He owns them." Elena tried to crawl backward, reaching blindly for anything she could use. "You never loved anyone," she said, voice shaking but loud. "You only ever wanted something to control." The words enraged him. He grabbed her by the hair and hauled her halfway upright. "You were mine." And then another voice cut through the room like a blade. "No." Dante stood in the doorway. If Elena lived to be 100, she would never forget the sight of him in that moment. There was blood at his temple. His shirt was torn at one shoulder. His chest rose too fast, as if he had fought his way through half the house to get there. But his eyes were the most frightening thing about him. Not wild, not reckless, focused with a depth of fury so absolute it had become cold, the kind of cold that ends things. Victor yanked Elena tighter against him, gun appearing from somewhere in the chaos and pressing hard against her ribs. "Take one more step," he shouted, "and she dies." Dante stopped. Not because he was afraid for himself, because Elena felt his entire body lock around the possibility of losing her. "Let her go," he said. Victor laughed, breathless and unhinged. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The accusation landed like truth because it was. Dante's jaw flexed. "Yes," he said. "I should have." Elena felt Victor's grip tighten. "Look at him," Victor hissed in her ear. "He knew what I was. He let me walk. He let me find you." The words should have broken her further. Instead, in that moment, with the gun digging into her side, and Leah crying behind the couch, and Dante bleeding in the doorway, something fierce and clear rose through the fear. "Maybe he made a mistake," Elena said, each word trembling but true. "But he was never the man I had to fear." Victor's body went rigid with rage. "You'd choose him?" Elena looked straight at Dante as she answered. "He may be a monster to the world," she said, voice cracking, "but he never made me afraid to be loved." The next seconds moved too fast for memory to separate cleanly. Victor jerked the gun upward, maybe to fire, maybe to reposition. Maybe because Elena's words had finally broken the last thread, holding him together. Dante moved the instant Victor's wrist shifted. There was a shot. Then another. Elena felt the impact of bodies colliding more than she saw it. Dante hit Victor with enough force to drive them both sideways into the wall. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Elena dropped hard to the floor, scrambling toward the couch where Leah was sobbing. Behind her, the fight became a blur of grunts, curses, and violent momentum. Victor was stronger than she wanted to remember. Dante was more ruthless than she had yet seen. They crashed into the overturned table. Victor reached for the gun. Dante slammed his forearm down on Victor's wrist until something cracked. Victor screamed. Another gunshot rang out so close, Elena's ears rang. Then silence. The kind of silence that arrives all at once and feels unreal. Elena turned. Victor lay on the floor, eyes open and shocked in the way the dead sometimes look when they didn't expect the ending to come. Dante stood over him, chest heaving, gun lowered, blood spreading across the side of his shirt. For one suspended second, Elena could not tell if the blood was Victor's or his. Then Dante swayed. She moved before she thought. Leah was still crying, but alive. The guards who had survived were flooding the room now, weapons drawn, radios screaming, medics shouting. None of it mattered. Elena dropped to her knees in front of Dante, just as he staggered and caught him before he hit the floor. His weight was terrifyingly real in her arms. "No," she whispered, hand sliding to his side, where the blood was warm and far too much. "No, no. No." His eyes found hers immediately, as if even pain could not pull his focus away. "You're safe," he said, and the absurdity of those words in that moment broke something in her. "Don't you dare," she choked out. "Don't you dare do this and say that like it's enough." He tried to smile and failed. "Leah?" "She's okay." Elena pressed her hand harder against the wound, tears blurring everything. "She's okay. Stay with me." His hand came up, shaking now, weaker than she had ever seen it, and touched her face with the same reverence it had the night of the storm. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The apology gutted her because it carried all the unsaid things between them. The years-old mistake, the withheld truth, the danger he brought, the love he had never fully spoken. Elena leaned down, forehead against his, and the words came out of her before pride, anger, or fear could stop them. "I love you." The room disappeared. The blood, the shouting, the dead man on the floor. None of it mattered in that single, impossible second. Dante's eyes closed briefly, as if the confession itself had reached somewhere pain could not. "Say it again," he breathed. She was crying too hard to care who heard. "I love you." This time his mouth curved, faint and wrecked and real. "Good," he whispered. "Now I have a reason not to die." Dante Moretti did not die that night. Men like him rarely go quietly, and perhaps the universe was not yet done punishing or rewarding either of them. The bullet had gone through his side, missing what would have killed him by inches, though the doctor later said another minute without pressure on the wound might have changed that. The estate doctor stabilized him before the ambulance no one officially called could be recorded by systems no one trusted. Bianca was taken into custody by Dante's men before the police ever reached the gates. Later, the truth would come out in ugly pieces. She had not planned to hand Victor the estate. She had believed him when he told her he only wanted to scare Elena into leaving, that Dante had become distracted, reckless, compromised by a woman who did not belong in his world. Jealousy and hurt had made her stupid. Victor had used that. Men like him always find the fracture and widen it until everything breaks. It would not save her from consequences. Nothing would. But it mattered because Elena, even after everything, still wanted to understand how people betray themselves into betraying others. The official story that reached the outside world was cleaner than the truth. An armed intruder, a violent domestic fugitive, a confrontation, casualties, private security response. No mention of obsession, guilt, love, or the strange, terrible tenderness that can grow in the middle of violence. Real life rarely makes the papers the way it feels in the body. The days that followed moved in a haze of white sheets, antiseptic, low voices, and the emotional exhaustion that comes after surviving something your body was never meant to survive. Dante recovered in a private medical wing of the estate, because there were too many reasons not to take him to a hospital full of cameras and questions. Elena stayed. There was no more pretending otherwise. She stayed because Leah refused to leave the room unless she could check on him first. She stayed because every time she tried to imagine walking away after the truth of what they had been through, her chest tightened like grief. She stayed because love, once admitted under that kind of pressure, does not politely retreat when the immediate danger ends. It remains complicated, bruised, real. The first time Dante fully woke after surgery and found her asleep in the chair beside his bed, He watched her long enough that she felt it, and opened her eyes. They looked at each other in silence, all the arguments and confessions and unfinished pain sitting between them like a third person in the room. Elena should have started with anger, with boundaries, with practical questions about recovery and next steps. Instead, the first thing out of her mouth was, "You scared me." Dante, pale and still weak but unmistakably himself, answered with the kind of honesty that had become his most dangerous trait. "Good," he murmured. "Maybe now you know how I've felt every day since the alley." Elena stared at him. Since the alley? He held her gaze. Before the alley. There it was again, the deeper truth still waiting. This time, when he told her everything. Not because she demanded it, though she had every right to. Because he had finally learned that half-truths are a kind of violence when someone has already survived enough of them. Years earlier, Victor Hayes had been a small but useful part of a network tied to one of Dante's shipping operations, moving things that made money and required discretion. Victor had been smart enough to stay valuable and cruel enough to hurt women who were too vulnerable to fight back. Dante had heard rumors. Then complaints, then proof. He removed Victor, threatened him, made it clear the city would become hostile ground if he stayed. It should have ended there. It didn't. Victor changed names for a while, drifted, reappeared clean and polished and charming enough to fool people who didn't know what to look for. One afternoon, months before Elena ever saw Dante in the alley, he was leaving a restaurant he owned when he noticed a man in a parking lot gripping a woman's wrist too hard while smiling for strangers walking by. The woman had tired eyes and a little girl with curls hiding behind her leg. The man was Victor. The woman was Elena. Dante had not intervened then, because Victor hadn't crossed a line in public that would justify exposing what Dante knew without dragging Elena into a world she hadn't chosen. Instead, he put eyes on Victor. Quietly, he told himself it was caution, damage control, responsibility. But somewhere between watching Elena carry groceries one-handed while holding Leah's tiny fingers with the other, and seeing her laugh once outside the diner at something her daughter said, and realizing how carefully she covered bruises that appeared and disappeared, the reason changed. "I was supposed to be making sure he didn't hurt anyone else," Dante said from the bed, voice low. "Then one day I realized I wasn't just watching him anymore. I was watching you." It should have frightened her. Parts of it still did. The surveillance, the knowledge, the reach. But truth told, plainly, has a way of landing differently than truth discovered in fragments. "Why didn't you stop it sooner?" Elena asked. And this time the question was not accusation. It was pain seeking shape. Dante looked away for the first time. "Because I thought if I moved too soon, I'd force you into my world before you were ready. Because I believed if I scared him enough, he'd keep his hands off you. Because I was arrogant enough to think I could control a man like that from a distance." He met her eyes again. "And because by the time I knew, I wasn't acting out of responsibility anymore. I was afraid if I came too close, you'd see exactly what I'd become where you were concerned." Elena's throat tightened. "What had you become?" The answer came without hesitation. "A man willing to tear apart everything I built if it meant you and your daughter got to live. It was too much and not enough. Romantic and terrifying in equal measure, exactly like him." Elena sat with that for a long time, then said the only honest thing left. "I don't know how to forgive the part of this that hurt me." Dante nodded once, accepting the blow. "Then don't forgive it yet." She blinked. What? I'm not asking for that now. His voice remained steady, even weak. I'm asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving the part of me that loves you is stronger than the part that failed you. There are lines men say to seduce, and there are lines men say when they have been cut open enough to stop performing. Elena knew the difference now. Healing did not arrive like a movie montage. It came slowly in the unglamorous work of surviving after the adrenaline leaves. Leah needed reassurance that bad men could stay gone. Elena needed therapy, sleep, and the difficult relearning of a nervous system that had forgotten peace. Dante needed weeks to recover physically, and perhaps longer to recover from the knowledge that he had nearly lost the two people who had somehow become the center of his life. But if love is real, it reveals itself less in grand declarations than in repetition. Dante kept every boundary she still needed. He did not push for labels. He did not demand closeness because she had said she loved him under emergency lights and blood loss. He sat with Leah during her nightmares when Elena was too exhausted to keep her own eyes open. He attended meetings from his bed while coloring pages dried on the table beside him because Leah had decided he needed better room decorations. He let Elena ask hard questions about the parts of his business she could not accept and answered more than she expected. He shut down entire operations tied to people like Victor, not because it made him look noble, but because he finally understood that compartmentalized power still bleeds into innocent lives. The estate changed, too. Less secrecy, more light, fewer whispers. The household that had once treated Elena like a temporary complication began to understand what Dante himself had known long before he spoke it. She was no longer a guest. She was the axis around which his choices now turned. Even Bianca's absence became part of the house's education. Jealousy and entitlement had nearly destroyed everything. No one was eager to repeat that lesson. Weeks later, when Dante was finally strong enough to walk the grounds without a doctor hovering nearby, Elena found him in the garden at dusk with Leah on his shoulders and a look on his face she would never have believed possible the night she first saw him in the alley. Peace. Not complete. Men like Dante are rarely untouched by the lives they've lived, but real. Earned. He lowered Leah so she could chase fireflies near the hedges, then turned toward Elena with the kind of quiet attention that still made her heart misbehave. "There's something I need to show you," he said. She followed him inside, down a hall she had never used, into his study. This time there were no secrets hidden in half-open doors. He opened the desk drawer, removed a thick envelope, and placed it in her hands. "What is this?" she asked. "Read it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were legal documents, trust papers, property transfers, financial accounts, insurance. Her eyes moved over the pages too quickly at first, then slowed as the meaning landed. A protected trust in Leah's name, education funds, a home deed, provisions that would take effect if Dante died or became incapacitated. Everything arranged with ruthless thoroughness, everything signed weeks ago, before the final attack, before her confession, before he knew if she would ever forgive him. Elena looked up, stunned. "You did this before." Her voice failed. Dante's answer was almost unbearably simple. "If I had failed that night, I needed to know you were both protected." Tears burned instantly. "You made plans for my daughter. For our future," he corrected softly. "Even if I didn't get to stay in it." There are moments when a woman realizes she is not being chosen for convenience or obsession or control, but with the terrifying depth of intention that rewrites the shape of her life. This was one of them. Elena crossed the room before she fully decided to. She set the papers down, cupped his face in both hands, and kissed him. Not like the almost kiss during the storm. Not interrupted. Not restrained by fear or panic or alarms. Slow. Certain. The kind of kiss that says, I know the worst of what you've done and the best of what you're trying to become. And I am still here. Dante made a sound low in his throat, like restraint finally giving way. His hands came to her waist, careful even now, as if some part of him would always remember asking permission with his eyes before taking anything from her body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Elena rested her forehead against his and laughed softly through tears. You're still terrifying, she whispered. Good, he murmured, ghosting his thumb over her cheek. The world should stay afraid. She shook her head. I'm talking about what you do to me. That made him smile, and there it was again, that rare, devastating softness she had once thought impossible in a man like him. That, he said, voice dropping, is the only kind of fear I never want you to lose. It would have been easy to end the story there. The dangerous man healed, the single mother safe, the child happy, love confessed, future secured. It would have been a beautiful ending. But stories built in shadows rarely close without one final reminder that peace is something you protect, not something you assume will remain just because you finally reached it. The reminder arrived on an ordinary afternoon. That was what made it so chilling. Leah was in the nursery wing painting at the table with the housekeeper. Elena was in the kitchen. Dante was in a meeting he had reluctantly shortened because he had promised Leah he would watch her best butterfly painting yet. The day was bright, calm, almost painfully normal. Then one of the newer guards entered the kitchen, looking too pale for a man trained not to show fear. Sir, he said into the comm unit, clipped near his collar. We found something at the north gate. Dante was there in seconds, Elena right behind him, despite the order in his eyes that she stay put. At the gatehouse, a sealed package sat on the desk where incoming deliveries were screened. No label, no courier record. Just a brown envelope, thick enough to feel deliberate. Dante opened it with gloved hands, while every muscle in Elena's body tightened. Inside was a single photograph, recent, taken from a distance through a telephoto lens. Elena in the garden with Leah, Dante in the background, watching them. On the back, in block letters not written by Victor, were 4 words, "This isn't over yet." The air changed instantly. Not because the message itself was dramatic, because Victor was dead, which meant someone else had been watching. Someone else had enough reach to get a package through outer screening. Someone else knew where to strike. Elena looked at Dante. He looked back at her with the same terrible calm she had first seen in the alley. Then he folded the photo once, very carefully, and said the words that told her everything she needed to know. Lock the estate. This is where some people would ask whether justice was truly served. Victor Hayes was dead. The man who had terrorized Elena for years would never touch her again. The woman who helped open the gate had paid for her betrayal. The empire that once allowed men like him to slip through cracks had begun to change, because Dante finally understood what power costs when it is misused or left unchecked. Elena and Leah had found something that looked astonishingly like home in a place that once felt impossible. And yet, if this story teaches anything, it is that survival is not a single moment. It is a series of choices. Leave, run, call, trust, fight, stay, love anyway, The most dangerous man in the city did save a single mother from her abusive ex. Then he saved her again. Then again. He brought her into his house because it was the only place he believed his reach could outweigh Victor's obsession. And what happened next was not a fairy tale. It was messier, more painful, and far more powerful than that. It was two broken people learning that protection without honesty can still wound, but honesty, after failure, can become the foundation of something real if both people are brave enough to face it. It was a little girl recognizing safety before the adults could. It was a man feared by everyone else, becoming gentle in exactly the places that mattered. And it was a woman who had every reason to run, discovering that love can feel terrifying for all the right reasons when it is finally given without force. So now I want to ask you the question this story leaves behind. If you were Elena, would you have forgiven Dante after learning he knew what Victor was long before he stepped into that alley? Was he truly her protector? Or was he a dangerous man trying to make up for a mistake that should never have happened? And if the world still had one more enemy watching from the shadows, would you stay in the mansion, or would you run before love asked you to risk everything again? Let us know in the comments what you would have done, and if this story kept you with us until the very end, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one might make you question everything you think you know about love, danger, and the people we trust when fear leaves us no easy choice.